Trump could accidentally destroy American dominance. For almost 80 years, the United States did something no empire in modern history had ever achieved. It built a world where its currency became global money, its military became global security, its companies became global infrastructure, and even its culture became global reality. America did not simply become powerful, America became the system itself. But history has a strange sense of irony. Sometimes the greatest threat to an empire does not come from foreign enemies. It comes from the empire changing its own behavior, and that is why Donald Trump matters far beyond American politics. Because whether people love him or hate him, Trump may represent something much larger than one man. A signal that the United States is beginning to change fundamentally. Its priorities, its alliances, its economy, its relationship with the world. And if those changes continue, America may not collapse militarily, but it could slowly weaken the very foundations of the global order that made American dominance possible in the first place. The dangerous part is this: many Americans still believe power is only about strength. But real global dominance is not built on strength alone. It is built on trust. In this documentary, we explore how Donald Trump's economic nationalism, foreign buyings, trade wars, bars on the trains, foreign policy shifts, and Das and America First strategy may unintentionally accelerate the decline of American global dominance. From China's rise and de-dollarization to weakened alliances and growing geopolitical fragmentation, this is the deeper story behind the changing world order. When historians study powerful empires, they often discover the same pattern repeated again and again. Empires rarely believe they are declining while decline is happening. Rome believed it was eternal. Britain believed its empire would last indefinitely. The Soviet Union believed its system was stable right until the final years. Decline is usually psychological before it becomes visible economically. Institutions weaken slowly. Political trust erodes. Alliances become fragile. Internal divisions intensify. And most importantly, the world begins preparing for alternatives. This is what makes the Trump era historically important. Not because Trump alone can destroy American power. No single president can do that. But because Trump exposed something the rest of the world had already started noticing, America was becoming less predictable. And predictability is one of the most valuable forms of power any empire possesses. After World War II, the United States built the modern international order. The Bretton Woods system, the dollar-centered financial structure, global trade institutions, security alliances across Europe and Asia. This system was not created out of kindness alone. It benefited America enormously. Countries traded in dollars, held U.S. debt, relied on American military protection, integrated into American-led markets. And because of this system, America gained extraordinary advantages. It could borrow cheaply, run massive deficits, project military power globally, influence international finance unlike any country in history. But maintaining global leadership requires sacrifice. This is the part many ordinary citizens inside empires eventually begin questioning. Why protect other countries? Why pay for global security? Why support alliances? Why tolerate trade imbalances? These questions are politically powerful because they feel emotionally reasonable. And Trump understood this better than most politicians. He recognized that many Americans no longer viewed globalization as beneficial. Factories had disappeared. Manufacturing jobs declined. Small towns weakened economically. The middle class felt increasingly insecure. Meanwhile, the small elites in major cities appeared wealthier than ever. This created resentment, not just economic resentment, civilizational resentment. Many Americans began feeling that the system America built for the world no longer worked for ordinary Americans themselves. And in some ways, they were not entirely wrong. Globalization created enormous wealth overall, but the benefits were distributed unevenly. Corporations benefited massively from cheap labor and global supply chains. Financial markets expanded. Technology companies became dominant, but many industrial workers felt abandoned. Trump entered politics at exactly this psychological moment. And his message was simple. America was being taken advantage of. China was benefiting unfairly. Allies depended too heavily on U.S. protection. Trade agreements hurt American workers. Whether people agreed or disagreed, the emotional power of this message was enormous. Because strong nations often become vulnerable when large portions of the population stop believing the system works for them. This is not unique to America. History has seen this repeatedly. Late-stage empires frequently develop tensions between global responsibilities and domestic frustrations. The Roman Empire faced similar pressures. Britain experienced this after World War II. The cost of maintaining global dominance eventually becomes politically controversial at home. And this is where Trump represented something deeper than normal politics. He represented the beginning of a more inward-looking America. An America less interested in managing the global system. An America more focused on transactional relationships. And while that approach may appeal domestically, it creates consequences internationally. Because global dominance depends partly on perception. Countries support systems they believe are stable. Allies cooperate when they trust long-term commitment. Financial systems remain dominant when confidence stays strong. But when uncertainty increases, countries quietly begin preparing alternatives. This is exactly what happened during Trump's first presidency. European leaders openly discussed reducing dependence on the United States. China accelerated efforts to strengthen regional influence. Countries began exploring trade arrangements outside traditional dollar channels. Again, this does not mean the dollar suddenly collapses. That idea is exaggerated online constantly. The dollar remains deeply dominant globally because the United States still possesses enormous economic, financial, and military advantages. But dominance is not binary. It can weaken gradually, and gradual weakening is often how major historical shifts actually happen. This is where China becomes central to the story. For decades, American corporations helped integrate China into the global economy. The logic seems simple. Economic integration would make China wealthier and eventually more politically aligned with the existing global order. But history rarely follows linear expectations. China used globalization differently than many Western policymakers anticipated. It became a manufacturing superpower, expanded infrastructure globally, invested heavily in industrial capacity, strengthened technological ambitions. While America increasingly shifted toward finance and services, China focused heavily on production. This created a strategic imbalance. America remained richer overall. Its military remained stronger, but China became critically important to global supply chains. And this changed global power dynamics dramatically. Trump recognized this challenge earlier than many traditional politicians. His administration pushed tariffs aggressively and framed China as a long-term strategic competitor rather than merely an economic partner. In some ways, this analysis was correct. The relationship between America and China had fundamentally changed. But the deeper question was always this: could America economically isolate China without damaging the very global system America itself depended on? That question remains unresolved today. Because globalization interconnected economies deeply. American companies depend on Chinese manufacturing. China depends on Western markets. Global supply chains depend on both. And when great powers begin economically separating from each other, inefficiency increases globally. Costs rise. Supply chains become fragmented, geopolitical tension grows, the world becomes less stable economically. This is one reason why the post-Cold War era now feels increasingly distant. For nearly 30 years after the Soviet Union collapsed, America faced no true global rival. That period created extraordinary confidence inside the United States. Many Americans assumed dominance was permanent, but history does not preserve permanent dominance. Every system eventually faces pressure, and pressure reveals weaknesses. Trump did not create all those weaknesses. Many already existed long before him. Debt was rising for decades. Manufacturing decline began decades earlier. Political polarization was already intensifying. But Trump accelerated certain trends psychologically. Most importantly, he normalized the idea that America might reduce commitment to the very international system it once built. This frightened allies significantly. Because from Europe to Asia, many countries built security strategies around long-term American reliability. When Trump criticized NATO repeatedly, European leaders became nervous. Not because NATO immediately collapsed, but because uncertainty itself changes strategic thinking. Countries begin asking dangerous questions. Can America still be trusted? Will future administrations remain committed? Should we prepare independently? And once allies begin psychologically preparing for reduced American leadership, global power structures slowly shift. This is one reason empires rarely notice decline immediately. The military may still appear overwhelmingly powerful. The economy may still remain enormous. But confidence beneath the surface changes first. And confidence matters enormously in geopolitics. Because global systems run partly on belief, the belief that trade routes remain secure, the belief that alliances remain stable, the belief that reserve currencies remain reliable. Once belief weakens, fragmentation begins slowly. This fragmentation is now visible globally. BRICS countries increasingly discuss alternatives to Western-dominated institutions. Regional trade agreements are expanding. Countries seek strategic autonomy rather than dependence on a single global power. Again, none of this means America disappears. The United States remains one of the most powerful nations in human history. Its universities dominate globally. Its military spending exceeds most rivals combined. Its financial markets remain enormously influential. Its technology sector remains world-leading. But the world is becoming more multipolar, and multipolar worlds are usually less predictable. This is the deeper historical shift happening beneath daily political arguments. Trump did not invent this transition, but he may have accelerated it unintentionally, especially through the psychology of distrust, because allies fear unpredictability almost as much as they fear weakness. And rivals exploit uncertainty strategically. China understood this clearly. Every moment of division inside the West creates opportunities for Chinese influence expansion. Not necessarily through war, through trade, infrastructure, investment, technology partnerships. Power in the modern world is not only military, it is economic integration. And China became extremely skilled at using economic relationships strategically. Meanwhile, America faced growing internal tensions. Political polarization worsened dramatically. Trust in institutions declined. Media ecosystems fragmented reality itself. This matters more than people realize because great powers require internal cohesion to sustain long-term global leadership. If societies become psychologically divided enough, strategic consistency weakens. Policies shift aggressively between administrations. Allies lose confidence. Rivals gain patience. And this may be the most important geopolitical advantage China currently possesses: long-term continuity. So, China can pursue strategic goals across decades. Democracies often struggle maintaining consistent strategies over long periods because elections constantly reshape priorities. Trump amplified this contrast dramatically. His style was disruptive by design, sometimes strategically effective, sometimes chaotic, but always unpredictable. That unpredictability created leverage in negotiations occasionally. But over time, unpredictability also carries costs because stable systems attract trust. And trust is one of the foundations of global dominance. The irony is that Trump's criticisms of globalization resonated because many of the problems were real. America did lose manufacturing capacity in key sectors. Wealth inequality did increase dramatically. Financial elites often benefited more than ordinary workers. These were legitimate structural issues. But solving structural problems while maintaining global dominance is extraordinarily difficult because empires face a painful contradiction. The systems that create global power often create domestic inequality internally. Globalization benefited America strategically overall, but many local communities suffered economically during the transition. And this created fertile ground for nationalist politics, not only in America, across much of the world. This is why the rise of populism globally matters historically. It signals growing dissatisfaction with the post-Cold War economic model. People increasingly question whether open global systems truly benefit ordinary citizens. And when enough citizens lose faith in globalization, countries become more protectionist. Trade conflicts rise, geopolitical competition intensifies, international cooperation weakens. The world becomes more fragmented, and fragmentation increases instability. This is where economic systems become psychologically important again. The modern financial system depends heavily on confidence and interconnectedness. If countries increasingly distrust one another, economic efficiency declines. Supply chains become regionalized, investment becomes politicized, technology ecosystems separate. This process is already happening gradually. The semiconductor industry illustrates this perfectly. Advanced technology is no longer viewed purely economically. It is now viewed strategically. AI, chips, telecommunications, rare earth minerals, all became geopolitical assets. This means the future global economy may become less open than the one that existed during peak globalization. And if that happens, growth itself could slow globally, because highly integrated systems tend to be economically efficient even if politically fragile. This creates a dangerous future possibility, a world where major powers distrust each other, supply chains fragment, economic nationalism rises, and military tensions increase simultaneously. History suggests those periods are rarely stable. Again, this does not guarantee catastrophe, but it does increase uncertainty significantly. And uncertainty changes behavior everywhere. Businesses invest differently. Governments prepare differently. Financial markets react differently. This is why Trump's presidency matters historically beyond American elections. He represented a shift in American psychology itself, from confident global leadership toward more skeptical nationalism, from managing the international system toward questioning the value of the system. And once the architect of a global order begins doubting the order itself, that's the rest of the world notices. That does not mean China automatically wins. China faces enormous challenges too: debt problems, demographic decline, property market instability, political constraints. The future is not predetermined, but the era of uncontested American dominance appears increasingly unlikely to return. And perhaps that is the real story of the 21st century. Not the sudden collapse of one empire, but the slow transition from one world order into another. A transition filled with competition, uncertainty, technological disruption, and geopolitical tension. Trump did not create that transition alone, but he became one of its clearest symbols. A symbol of an America increasingly uncertain about its role in the world. And history shows something uncomfortable about powerful civilizations. When a society loses consensus about its purpose, its dominance eventually weakens. Not instantly, gradually, then suddenly, and the rest of the world is already preparing for that possibility. And trust, once broken, is extremely difficult to restore.